I'm 28 years old, and I've been counting down the days until I marry Mark, my fiancé who's 30. We first crossed paths in college, but back then we were just casual friends. It wasn't until a few years after graduation, when we unexpectedly ran into each other at a party hosted by a mutual friend, that we really hit it off. That one night of catching up turned into more conversations, and eventually, a relationship. We've been together now for 4 incredible years. To give you some background, Mark and I couldn't be more different when it comes to our dating histories. In college, he had a bit of a reputation, the type of guy who turned heads, always charming, always involved with someone new. He was known for leaving a trail of broken hearts behind him and actually seemed to enjoy that bad boy persona. Even after breakups, he had this habit of keeping in touch with his exes, like he needed to hold on to every connection. I, on the other hand, had a much simpler past. Before Mark, I'd only dated one guy seriously in college. When that relationship ended, I made a clean break, no lingering texts, no let's be friends. I've never seen the point in maintaining contact with someone I once loved. So when Mark and I made things official, a lot of his friends were shocked. They couldn't believe the emotionally distant guy they knew had suddenly decided to settle down. It was like he flipped a switch and suddenly became this committed, serious partner. Coming off the emotional mess of my previous relationship, I was grateful for a fresh start with someone who, despite his past, seemed genuinely invested in making things work. For the most part, things between us were great, but there was one major bump early on. About 6 months into our relationship, I got a message from a woman on Instagram. She said she had something important to tell me about Mark. I wasn't sure what to expect, but curiosity got the better of me. She claimed that Mark had messaged her inappropriately, asking for explicit photos. I felt like the air had been knocked out of me. When I confronted him, he tried to lie at first, stumbling through denials, making excuses, but I wasn't buying any of it. Eventually, he broke down, admitted it had happened, and blamed it on being drunk. He begged me to forgive him. I seriously thought about ending things right then and there. But his constant apologies and the tears wore me down. I warned him that if anything like that ever happened again, we were done. After that mess, things got a lot better. The rest of our relationship was filled with laughter, good memories, and emotional growth. Mark was thoughtful, he planned romantic surprises, gave meaningful gifts, and was always up for a spontaneous date night. Over time, the trust slowly rebuilt, and it started to feel like we were truly happy together. That rocky moment became a distant memory as we focused on building a life side by side. Then, 2 months ago, Mark proposed to me during our trip to Africa. The proposal felt like something out of a romance novel under the open sky, surrounded by the wild beauty of the African landscape. He looked nervous but sincere as he talked about how much I meant to him and how I'd changed the way he saw love. Then, he got down on one knee and pulled out the most beautiful ring I'd ever seen, simple, elegant, and perfect. I cried as I said yes. Since then, life has been a blur of excitement. I threw myself into all the wedding planning, picking out my dream dress, curating the guest list, choosing the perfect invitations. Every detail felt like a piece of the future I'd always imagined. Mark was in charge of the honeymoon, and he seemed just as thrilled. He'd spend hours flipping through travel brochures, describing all the romantic things we'd do on our getaway. But while I was lost in the joy of it all, something was going on in the background that I never saw coming. As the big day got closer, I started noticing a change in Mark. He was glued to his phone more often, and not in a casual way. Sometimes, he'd smile at the screen, and when I'd ask what was so funny, he'd casually brush it off, saying it was just a reel on Instagram. The romantic date nights started fading into evenings where I felt like I was dining with a ghost, physically there, but mentally checked out. One night, during what was supposed to be a cozy dinner at home, I finally asked him if something was going on. For a second, I saw something flicker across his face, hesitation, maybe guilt, but he quickly covered it up and told me I was just being paranoid. He chalked it up to pre-wedding stress, claiming I was always overthinking and creating problems out of thin air. His words made me question myself. Was I really just spiraling from stress? Or was there something I wasn't seeing? I decided to ignore the nagging doubt. I convinced myself I was just anxious and let it go. Then yesterday, while Mark was out, I opened his laptop to double-check the travel plans for our honeymoon. We'd picked a tropical destination that had been on our bucket list for years, so I was excited to go over the details. As I was printing the itinerary, a message popped up on the screen. It was from a contact named Boss2. That struck me as odd. Curiosity took over, and I clicked the message. What I saw made my stomach drop. It was an explicit photo, definitely not something a boss would send. And even worse, I recognized the woman immediately. She wasn't his boss at all. She was a coworker named Martha, someone I'd actually met before at a company event. Seeing that image was shocking enough, but as I scrolled through their conversation, the horror deepened. The thread was full of flirty exchanges, confessions of love, jokes about me, and even intimate discussions about our relationship. Mark had told her things about my family, especially about my parents, which is a deeply sensitive topic for me. They had sent each other countless inappropriate photos and messages, and from what I gathered, this wasn't some fling. They'd been secretly involved for over a year. The worst part? Martha was married. I'd met her husband, too, a really decent guy who probably had no idea any of this was going on behind his back. I couldn't believe the level of betrayal from both of them. They'd managed to hide their affair for that long without anyone noticing. It felt cruel, heartless. As I kept reading, I noticed Martha had messaged Mark saying she didn't think she could handle seeing photos from our honeymoon. She said the thought of him with someone else made her sick. Mark reassured her, telling her not to worry, that he only belonged to her and that those honeymoon pictures would mean nothing. When she asked why he was even marrying me, his response crushed me. He said he was only still with me out of convenience, that after so long, it was just easier to stay. Martha agreed. She admitted she stayed with her husband for the same reasons: stability and comfort. She told him everything she ever wanted was with him. The two of them kept chatting like they were proud of how well they'd hidden their affair, convinced we'd never catch on. What really shattered me was learning they had actually planned to meet during our honeymoon. Somehow, she'd managed to talk her husband into vacationing at the same tropical resort we'd picked, the same exact dates. Their plan was to act surprised if we bumped into each other, then find excuses to sneak away and secretly meet up. At some point while reading those messages, I realized tears had started rolling down my cheeks. My chest felt tight, like the air had thickened, and I could barely breathe. I took screenshots of every single message, just in case. For the rest of the day, I walked around in a daze, the betrayal looping in my head like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had no idea how to even start confronting Mark. Then came the cherry on top. That evening, Mark called to say he'd be working late. That lie crushed whatever tiny bit of hope I was still holding on to. That night, I curled up in bed alone, emotions crashing over me in waves as I kept reading the messages on my phone. The shock was slowly giving way to a boiling mix of anger and heartbreak. I just couldn't wrap my head around how Mark could do this. How could he plan a romantic honeymoon with me while secretly plotting to see another woman on the same trip? It felt like my whole life had been a joke to him. And at that moment, something inside me snapped. I wanted him to feel the weight of the pain he caused. Revenge started to take shape in my mind. When Mark got home late that night, I pretended to be asleep. I didn't want to see his face, let alone speak to him. The next morning, the first thing I did was search for Martha's husband on Facebook. I found him, and sent a message asking if we could meet in private to talk about something serious involving his wife. I emphasized how important it was that he not mention anything to her just yet. Now, as I'm writing all of this, I'm anxiously waiting to hear back from him. Mark has no clue what's coming. He doesn't know that I'm planning to reveal everything to him, to Martha's husband, and to the people he works with. My goal is to forward the messages, not the explicit ones, to all his coworkers using his phone and out him for who he really is. But first, I'll let him think I'm still clueless. I'll play along, acting like the doting fiancé, while I get everything in place. Update 1: Martha's husband, Jack, finally responded. I'd been on edge for hours waiting. When he replied asking why I wanted to meet, I came up with a quick lie about planning a surprise birthday party for Martha. Since people at their office knew Mark and Martha were friendly, I hoped the excuse would fly. We ended up meeting at a little cafe near where he worked. The moment we sat down with our coffee, he called me out. Said Martha's birthday wasn't anywhere close. I gave him an awkward smile and admitted that, yeah, I'd lied, but only because what I had to share was urgent and personal. His expression turned serious as I pulled out my phone and started showing him the screenshots I had taken from Mark's laptop. He scrolled through them quietly at first, but I could see the disbelief on his face growing with every message. I explained everything, from how I found the texts, to the emotional affair they'd been hiding, to their ridiculous plan to accidentally run into each other on our honeymoon. Jack just stared at me, jaw clenched, shaking his head in shock. He asked how long I'd known, and I told him the truth. I had only discovered it the night before. I could see how much it hurt him. He looked absolutely blindsided, like his whole world had tilted. When I mentioned the vacation setup, his face went pale. He had no idea that Martha had manipulated him into booking the same destination just to carry out their little fantasy. I laid it all out, the fake surprise, the secret rendezvous, and his eyes just got darker. I could tell he was going through the same emotional roller coaster I had just been on. And honestly, my heart broke for him, too. Then Jack hit me with a detail I wasn't expecting. He and Martha had been trying for a baby. They were planning to buy a bigger home and start a new chapter together. He said he had noticed subtle changes in her behavior lately, how she seemed distant, and how she stayed late at work more often, but he chalked it up to stress. I shared that Mark had been acting the same way with me, glued to his phone, emotionally checked out, and trying to convince me that I was imagining things. Jack shook his head, then asked what I planned to do with all the proof I had. I was honest. I told him I was planning to expose Mark and that, unfortunately, Martha would be implicated too. I told him I'd leave her name out if he wasn't comfortable with it, but he surprised me. He said no, that she'd betrayed him just as much as Mark had betrayed me, and I had every right to expose them both. I nodded, appreciating his honesty, and then asked him what his next step would be. He said he couldn't stay with her, not after reading those messages. He had always wanted a family, but he no longer wanted her to be the mother of his children. Jack asked me to send him all the screenshots via airdrop so he could take them to his lawyer. Before we parted ways, we exchanged numbers. He warned me to break things off with Mark first, in case Mark got angry or tried to retaliate. I reassured him that I already had a plan in place. I was going to move out while Mark was at work the next day and leave nothing but an empty house behind. I've got a lot to take care of, but everything is in motion. I'll share another update when things have fully played out. Update 2. I know it's been a few weeks since my last post, and I want to let everyone know I'm okay. Honestly, I'm doing better than expected. Everything unfolded just as I'd planned. First, I waited for Mark to go to work, then my brothers came over and helped me move all my things back to my parents' house. My family already knew what was going on and were completely supportive. I thought about leaving Mark a note, but I ended up skipping that. I wanted him to feel the silence, the confusion, the unanswered questions. I wanted him to sit there wondering where it all went wrong. I left the engagement ring sitting right in the middle of the dining table. I deleted every photo of us on social media and blocked him from everything. Even though my heart was still broken, and I knew there'd be more tears in the days ahead, my parents reminded me that learning the truth before the wedding was a blessing in disguise. Their words hit me hard. As painful as it was, they were right. I had dodged a lifetime of lies. Just as I expected, Mark started blowing up my parents' phones, calling, texting, begging them to tell him where I was. I could almost picture the moment he walked into the house and realized everything, the furniture gone, my clothes gone, the ring left behind. He must have panicked. He kept pleading with my family, saying he needed to explain. My parents, who've always been fiercely protective of me, stood their ground and blocked every attempt Mark made to contact me. They told him in no uncertain terms that there was no fixing what he had broken. My dad, with the same no-nonsense attitude he carried through his military years, let Mark know he never wanted to see his face again. The idea of Mark facing off with my 6-foot-tall, ex-military father actually made me crack a smile. Mark had always been a little intimidated by him. After that, Mark went completely silent. He had no clue that his real nightmare was just beginning. You see, I knew Mark barely ever touched his home laptop, which made it the perfect tool for what I had planned. The day after I moved out, a scheduled email went out to everyone in his office. Inside were screenshots of the messages he'd exchanged with Martha, not just the romantic ones, but the ones where they mocked coworkers and even made jokes about their boss. It was brutal and honest, and exactly what he deserved. The fallout? Explosive. The email hit inboxes early that morning, and I can only imagine Mark's face when he realized the secret affair he thought he'd kept buried had been broadcast across the entire office. I didn't include anything graphic, but there was enough to leave no room for misinterpretation. One of his coworkers, Sarah, who had been my Facebook friend for years, reached out to check in on me. She was kind, empathetic, and shocked. She said the messages weren't just unprofessional, they were downright humiliating, especially the parts where Mark and Martha joked about their team and even their boss. That was the tipping point. Mark's boss, after reading those conversations and seeing herself mocked, was absolutely livid. What was once just a personal betrayal became a full-on workplace scandal. The trust was gone, and so was Mark's professional reputation. Mark, desperate and panicked, tried calling my parents again, but it was too late. The email had come from his own laptop, using his own work account. There was no covering his tracks. There was no blaming it on someone else. He had dug this hole himself. Sarah kept me posted over the next few days. She told me the office environment turned ice cold. People stopped talking to Mark and Martha altogether. The gossip spread fast, and the weight of public shame started closing in on them. Then came the final blow. Their boss called them in, and after going over everything, she fired both of them. Mark and Martha had not only crossed personal lines, they'd breached workplace ethics. Their actions were labeled misconduct, and just like that, they were out of a job. When I found out, I felt this strange combination of vindication and sadness. I didn't regret what I did, not one bit, but I also understood how heavy the consequences must have felt for them. Actions have reactions, and Mark was finally feeling the full sting of his. Jack, Martha's husband, got in touch with me around the same time. He let me know that Martha had exploded with rage after being exposed. She blamed me, called me all sorts of names, and was furious that her life had been upended. Jack, however, wasn't budging. He served her with divorce papers, citing the affair and the screenshots as the reason. She tried to argue, begged for a second chance, but Jack stood firm. He told her she wasn't the woman he wanted to raise a family with. Now that everything was out in the open, a strange calm settled over me. I started to feel lighter, more in control. That doesn't mean everything was easy, though. Some days, I'd find myself locked in the bathroom, crying quietly for hours, overwhelmed by the sadness and loss. It's not like you can erase 4 years just like that. Grieving what I thought we had, it came in waves. Still, I held on to transparency as my anchor. Being honest with myself, facing the pain head-on, that's what helped me get through the darkest moments. Update 3. It's been 3 months since I last shared an update, and I just want to say thank you. So many people reached out with kind words and support. Even if I couldn't reply to everyone, I read every single message, and they meant more to me than I can explain. To help process everything, I've been going to therapy. And honestly, it's made a huge difference. Talking through my emotions, unpacking the betrayal, the guilt, the anger, it's been tough but incredibly healing. Every day brings a new challenge, but I finally feel like I'm moving forward instead of staying stuck in that one awful moment. Mark did show up one last time, standing outside my parents' house, pleading to talk. Against my better judgment, I let him in mostly because I didn't want him causing a scene in front of the neighbors. He launched into this long speech, saying he never meant for any of it to happen, that he felt vulnerable, that Martha had come onto him and he had tried to resist. Classic blame shifting. He said he was shocked when he realized I knew and asked why I never confronted him. I looked him in the eye and told him straight it was pretty rich of him to expect me to sit around waiting for his explanation while he was busy sneaking around with a coworker. I didn't need his excuses. I didn't want them. I told him I didn't want to be with him anymore, and nothing he said would change that. He tried to keep going, but I shut him down. I told him I wasn't interested in hearing another word. He looked stunned. Maybe he expected me to cry, or beg, or give him some sliver of hope. Instead, I stood up, told him I couldn't trust him ever again, and reminded him that the empty house he hated coming back to? That was the bed he made. He mentioned he was moving back to his hometown now that he'd lost his job, hoping for some pity. But I didn't offer any. He pushed for more conversation, but I made it clear we were done. I didn't want updates, apologies, or explanations. I walked him to the door and closed it behind him, feeling relief and a little sorrow wash over me. That talk was the closure I needed. And thankfully, he hasn't reached out since. Outside of therapy, I've been focused on rebuilding my life. Job hunting has become my top priority. I'm determined to get back on my feet and move into my own place again. Right now, I'm living with my parents, and while that might seem like a step back, it's actually been comforting. Familiar. Safe. My brothers check in often, especially on weekends, and that kind of support has made all the difference. This transition has been hard, no doubt. But it's also made me appreciate how strong I can be. I'm learning to trust myself again, especially my instincts, which ended up being right all along. This whole experience, as painful as it's been, pushed me toward growth I didn't know I needed. And now, I'm ready to take that pain and turn it into something new. Something better.